It's my pleasure to welcome Professor Charita Pattiarachi today, the speaker of this webinar. Professor, thank you for accepting to deliver this very interesting speech about maritime accidents and in the Indian Ocean. Over the recent past, there have been several maritime accidents in the Indian Ocean that resulted in long-term damage to the marine environment through oil spills and nurdles. Nurdles is plastic pellets, as it's explained here, among others. Yeah, and Professor Charita has been working on these areas for many years. And so, to give an introduction about Professor Charita Pattiarachi, Professor Charita Pattiarachi is a professor of coastal oceanography at the Oceans Graduate School and the Oceans Institute at the University of Western Australia. He leads the IMOS Ocean Glider facility. His research encompasses coastal ocean physical processes and their influence on climatic, biological, and geological processes in estuaries, the near shores, and the continental shelf. Today, Professor Charita has directly supervised more than 285 people, 20 doctoral theses, 75 postgraduate research students, and 173 honors coursework master's thesis students. He has published over 500 articles, which include 196 in peer-reviewed international journals. And so you see, Professor Charita Pattiarachi has a very decorated career over many years. And Professor Pattiarachi is the recipient of Vice Chancellor's inaugural Senior Research Award in 2014 and Kevin Stark Memorial Award for Excellence in Coastal and Ocean Engineering in 2011 and Eminent Sri Lankan Scientist Award in 2001. So, and with this huge career record with research and academic work, Professor Charita, it's a very pleasure to welcome you to this webinar. And it be really on behalf of IESLWA chapter, I would like to thank you for accepting this to deliver this speech today. And so I also welcome all the participants who have logged in to listen to this webinar, and welcome you all as well. And this is going to be a very exciting presentation where Professor Charita will cover many aspects that you see in regarding maritime accidents and pollution and a lot of effects happening in the oceans. So therefore, I welcome Professor Charita. Please, it's your time. I welcome you to start your presentation. And it's over to you, Professor Charita Pattiarachi.
Thank you very much for that introduction. I will share my screen. Do you see my screen?
Yeah, we can see it.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for the invitation. So I very quickly go through various things that I have been involved in the Indian Ocean. And I would like to acknowledge some of the people who have contributed to this talk. Now, when we I found this placard, which is very, very appropriate. Every disaster movie from Hollywood starts with the government ignoring a scientist. And unfortunately, when we have an incident, we have a disaster, we have something, there are many people who get involved. Some of them don't have the expertise, and a lot of them actually provide misinformation. So in these type of incidents, it's very important that we actually talk about science. Everything that we do should be based on science and evidence-based. So in the last 20 years or so, we've had many major disasters. These four that I've sort of done is because I have been intimately involved in them. So the tsunami in 2004, which we then ended up developing a warning system so that the warning can now actually come to people. We all know when there's a tsunami happening anywhere in the world, we would actually get a warning and we would know in the news. Now, that didn't actually happen before 2004. And I was part of the team which actually put that warning system together. And we also, in a lot of these things, unfortunately, is that we are in a society where we are reactive. We try to respond to something after many things have happened and repeated before we actually have, and to trying to mitigate things, although we know the technology. So the disappearance of the Malaysian Airlines 370, we could actually track it before because we had the capability, but nobody thought of doing that. Then we had oil spills in Mauritius and Sri Lanka and the Express Pearl in Sri Lanka. So I'll talk about some of these as we go. I'll give you so in all of this, what we are basically talking about is a system that we have forcing in the ocean, which is from winds and tides and river flow, surface heat fluxes, which generate wind waves, vertical mixing, currents, etc. In the end, what we are basically looking at, what happens to something which is on the surface of the ocean and where does it end up? So for this, we basically have to have hydrodynamic models. We need to have computing resources. And then more importantly, we actually have to have a model which has the appropriate physics, appropriate forcing, and the resolution that will allow us to make a good forecast and how to manage these systems. But unfortunately, we cannot deal with, however much we do, human behavior. And then I will say a lot of the things that we talked about could have been saved, but it's basically human error. So the first one that I would like to talk, this is not in the Indian Ocean, but is relevant, is the YM efficiency. This was lots of cargo of Newcastle in Sydney. You can see the picture here. And this cargo and plastics ended up along the whole of the New South Wales coast, many kilometers. And you can see on here, these are empty cream packets, etc. So the Australian government actually had to go and clean it up. And then you had, these are the loads. So it had whole cars, tires, bicycles, a whole container full of chips packets and bottles, etc. So in a lot of these, you basically have an insurer. There's 1,000 tons of debris were cleared from the New South Wales plastic coastline. Now, the insurance, the Britannia P&A, is that they don't actually constitute pollution and should be left undisturbed, because Australia is not a signatory to Convention of the Removal of Wrecks, and because of that, Australia does not recognize pollution and the removal. So there was $28 million was cost to actually clean up, and then the insurance basically refused to play. But then they went to court, and fortunately, they settled out of court in July 2021. Now, Sri Lanka is in exactly the same situation, that we have not signed into this Convention of Wrecks. So, MH370 disappeared on the 8th of March. We basically said, oh, we would actually We started doing our simulations to say that any debris which may end up from the southern Indian Ocean will end up in the Western Indian Ocean, mainly Madagascar, Reunion, etc. The Australian government officially said that that debris will end up in Java and Sumatra. Now, there's a very strong current which goes from east to west here, and there's no way that any of these would actually cross that line. But that was the official stance of the Australian government until the flaperon, this part of the plane, ended up in Reunion Island. And then they started looking at their models to say where it would actually end up. And then they found out that when they ran the models, they have actually done the wind forcing incorrectly. They basically did a simple mistake of switching the different components. So shows that when you actually get something out of a model, we should act, you should really look whether you believe it or not. So this is our simulation of the MH370 debris ending up on the eastern, in the Western Indian Ocean. And then we basically, using these models, I could direct people to these areas where I have shown in circled in red, and they actually found pieces of debris. So our predictions were backed up by people actually going to the actual locations based on these predictions to find debris from the plane. Now, then we go on to looking at the Mauritius spill. So this is Wakashio. This is the ship in here. Now, if you look at here, the ship runs aground on a coral reef, 25th of July. And basically was there intact for almost 10 days or more, because the authorities locally didn't know what to do. And then a storm came, and then it basically breaking up the ship and then releasing the bunker oil in that system. So that's basically the ship. Ultimately, it broke in two, and you basically had a disaster on its own. So the ship originally came from Singapore and traveled across the Indian Ocean. This is Mauritius, and then hit Mauritius on its own. Now, what happened is that usually it was actually going past South Africa. These ships, you can see the traveling ships, they go away from Mauritius. The red line is the line which took by Wakashio. Now, why did the captain take this particular pathway? What do you think? And the captain wanted to speak to his mistress. So he was looking for an internet connection. So he was actually sailing close to the island to be able to do that. True story. So ran aground, human error completely, should not have happened. First mistake. The second mistake, the Mauritius authorities didn't do anything for 10 days. The ship was just there. If they actually got the ship out of the way, there wouldn't have been a problem. So then Sunday morning, I get a call from the Mauritius, the Prime Minister's office, one of my former students who are working, please help. We want to know where the ship, the oil may end up. So within 24 hours, we were able to manage to do some very quick simulations, but they didn't look very good because we had lower resolution models. Then we tried to do a lot more, and luckily in about 2 days, within 24 hours, they provided us with high resolution bathymetry, so we can actually simulate where the oil may be ending up. And then we could do a simulation. And now you actually see they were very worried. Most of their tourist parts were in here. There were lots of mangrove and aquaculture in this bay. So they were really interested in where this oil may ended up. So these simulations, you see that they were actually going into the mangroves and those aquaculture areas. But luckily, the winds and the currents were going to the southwest, and this area was actually covered. So more high resolution. So this is the tide going up and down. So the white bits which are doing is coral reefs exposing at low tide and immersing at high tide. Now, unfortunately, the system happened that they did the cleanup, which was here, and then the ships were, this is where the incident happened. They cleaned up, and then the tugs and were basically pulling the barges to go back to Port Louis. And when at the top of the island, a big wave came, took a barge and landed it top of a tug, and the tug sank with 4 people killed and another minor oil spill. So you can see how a very simple mistake from a captain wanting to make a phone call, and then inactivity, all of those could have been prevented very quickly if there was good response. So while this was happening, so this was basically in August 2020, and right towards 2 weeks later, get a call. So this is what I was actually talking about, this tug and the barge. The barge ended up top of the barge, and we basically had this tug basically sinking on that particular day. Look at the date, 31st of August. So, and then we did another simulation because the tug had a lot of oil in it, and where would the oil may end up as a resulting from that oil spill. So when that was happening, another thing happened. 31st of August, Mauritius, 3rd September. This is a tanker, New Diamond, which is basically going from Kuwait to the east coast of India. There was a fire in the engine room, and it was basically, you can see there's an oil spill in here, but that oil spill was basically through the oil in the engine room, through the water being sprayed onto the system. And then when we look at the currents and the winds at that time, you can see here we have what's called the Sri Lankan dome. We had a little eddy there all the time during the southwest monsoon. Here we see the winds because of the hills in the middle of the country. We actually have a wake, so low winds in this blue area, stronger winds in here, and you can actually see the currents. So we did simulations again. So this is that low winds. We basically showed that because of the prevailing winds and the currents, that oil, and if was actually escalated, would not end up on the coast, but will be transported away. It's a very small oil spill, and there was not really a lot of damage occurring at that time. So now we come to Express Pearl. So Express Pearl started off in Dubai, then went to Qatar, and then it went to India, and then came to Sri Lanka. Now you can see, but it basically had, when it left Dubai, and came to Qatar, they found that one of the containers, which contained nitric acid, was leaking. Qatar refused to unload, saying that, in fact, it was Ramadan time. They said they didn't have the people or they didn't have the facilities to unload. So the ship, rather than going back to Dubai, where they took the nitric acid, proceeded to India. Again, the Indians refused to unload, and then the ship came. Now, then there was a cyclone. So because there's a cyclone, you would imagine that the ship, the direct path, would basically be very close to the coast. But to avoid the cyclone, which is going through here, basically went offshore and then came to Colombo. And that came about 3 days later, if it wasn't for the cyclone in the system. So what it arrived on the 19th of May, there was smoke on the ship. On the 20th of May, there was an explosion. The ship caught fire on the 24th of May. It sank on 2nd of June. The ship is still there. They're now planning between now and Christmas, during the calmer northeast monsoon period, to actually remove the ship. So that's the blue line here is the track of the cyclone, and the red line is the track of the ship. So the ship could have arrived 3 days earlier, and maybe they could have sorted it out quicker. And also, the ship's owners and the agents never told the Sri Lankan authorities that they had a leaking container aboard. So when we look at the currents in that period, this is how it would work. We have westerly winds this time of the southwest monsoon. This is where the Express Pearl was. The surface currents basically do this Sri Lankan dome, and then we have the waves also onshore. So basically the ship is on fire. You can see here it's sunk. So this is now, it's on the seabed right now. It just looks like that. It's in 19 meters of water, but the ship is 40 meters high. So this is actually, the superstructure is sticking out of the water. Now, the biggest contamination was from what is called nurdles. Nurdles is the basic raw material, which looks these plastic pellets that make any kind of plastic. So if you eat a yogurt cup, 357 nurdles actually goes to make that cup. A toothbrush, 665, a shopping bag, 175, a Coke bottle or water bottle, about 1,000 nurdles, and the Ziploc bags, 315. So this is basically the raw material that any plastic happens. And as you know, the raw material comes from petrochemical, and this was produced in Qatar. And these nurdles get then transported by ships all over the world to convert these nurdles into what we use every day. So plastic pellets, that's what nurdles are. So this is what happened. There were 3 containers full of nurdles, 78,000 tons, or 3 billion of them. So now you can actually see the nurdles on the beach. You can see in the background the ship on fire. And then you can see they tried to, this was in the height of COVID. So people were banned from going, and the forces were basically cleaning. You can see the nurdles on fish. Now this is a movie. So it ended up with nurdle waves. Now these nurdles do not disappear. They will be in the environment like this for months, years, and decades to come. We will be finding them. So 78,000 tons of noodles. Now, if we look at globally, from rivers, only 6,000 tons globally. Every single river, if you count them all together, about 6,000 tons will come into the ocean every year. In one go, this particular incident contributed 78,000 tons. Amazing. So then we started looking at developing models to actually find out where these noodles may end up. And we basically had to keep going. We first started off with a small model domain. So here on the 25th of May, and within 4 days, we realized the noodles actually escaped our system. Then we had to actually make it bigger. So this is our noodles. So in red, you see the transport. Again, you can see after a couple of weeks, these noodles have actually exited our model domain. So then we had to go even bigger. So now we actually just multiply. I think I have a better one. Here we go. So now we're actually going through and simulating the system. So in red, you see the ocean features, the cold water in blue. The noodles are basically contained within different water masses, and they basically keep transporting across the system. Now they're ending up, you can see here in India, in southern India. These will end up in Sumatra. And then when the monsoon changes, the currents will change and they'll end up in the Maldives and then all the way up to Somalia. You can see in just about 2 months, they have now approaching Indonesia. So these are basically going to go back and forth, east and west for decades to come. Now, one interesting issue also happened in the first move. So normally what we would basically have is the currents which come across southern India will go across to the east. Through there, we should never have had any movement of the noodles to Puntland or to Mannar. But we had another cyclone Yas, which created a wave, which basically came across along the ocean. And you can see here a decrease in the water level in Trincomalee, and a few days later, decrease in the water level in Colombo. So it's pushing water from east to west. And then you actually see, when we do our modeling, you will see here, the arrows show the currents. This is the cyclone. You can see the strong currents during the cyclone. And now you would actually have this progression of the strong currents coming through. And here the currents change. You can see the strong currents pushing all the way up here. And then is the movement of the noodles now has gone to the north. So after 2 weeks, our models were saying 1/3 roughly, 32 were had made landfall, 28% was close in the Sri Lankan waters, and 40% in the open waters. So then we started doing some citizen science, and we asked people to go to different beaches to find nurdles. So you can actually take a photograph, show, and then we could actually track where the nurdles may ended up in. So here we also found in Maldives and also in Goa. So now we basically, this was 29th of June, where the nurdles have been found, and we now can actually go through to find out where these nurdles may end up. So every storm, so there was a storm very in October, sorry, in July, 1 month later. So you can see this is what would happen. This is in Mount Lavinia. The nurdles been washed on shore, and then they were basically saying, oh, there was an oil spill. There was never an oil spill. This is just discolored water. They were talking about if there was an oil spill, where would it go? Mainly, it would go with our modeling, says that they would basically be going shore parallel with minimum contact with the coast. They also said there were nitric acid. The dilution was so much, is 1 to 6 million. It's like putting 1 teaspoon in 100 bathtubs. So the impact of that, people don't like me saying it, was actually minimal in the system. There were lots of other materials. All of them would be in the same kind of dilution in the system. With the nurdles, they will remain for many decades. They're non-toxic. You and I can eat it, nothing would happen. But of course, through suffocation, as you can see, they could be die. They can, we already ingest plastics in our daily budget. The coral reefs are unaffected because the nurdles are buoyant. They're at the surface of the water. And I said that at that time, because people in Sri Lanka didn't want to eat seafood, it's safe to eat seafood. Then you basically have different mammals and seabirds, how they could affect different types of plastics, how they affect, and really in people were basically claiming that a lot of dolphins in here, and lots of these, you know, even in Batticaloa were dying, and in Jaffna, they can't really be affected in this very small system it's in there. Okay, so we keep running the models now, 31st of March. This is where we think the nurdles are distributed. And our model on the 12th of October last week, this is in red, is where we think the nurdles are now there. So I have a collaborative project now with NARA and Ocean Swell. In the next 2 or 3 weeks, we're actually going to go to these places and see whether we can actually find nurdles as we have predicted. So what are we doing about it? As I said, we are reactive. We didn't have anything that we could actually have to do. But then the Australian government offered help to Sri Lanka to prevent future incidents, and the Maritime Disaster Management System. So through Australian aid, they are investing $500,000, and we are actually through UWA are developing an ocean forecast system for Sri Lanka. So this will allow for us to provide 4-day forecast of winds and currents, water level, etc., to the maritime community. For example, the warnings to fishermen. And we're going to do this together with Dialogue to provide SMS messages to say not to go to sea because the weather is too bad. A whole lot of various particle systems, including tracking oil and plastic spills. So this is where we would actually provide our forecast around Sri Lanka. and then it'll all be provided through a website similar to this. So this is winds around Sri Lanka in the model. So summarizing, the model selection, resolution, the background knowledge is critical. You all have to rise above hype, emotion, but stick to the basic science to be able to deal with these events and be prepared for the next time. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Bhattacharya. Now is the time for it's a very interesting speech. And we learned a lot about the ocean currents and the pollution that you can see on oceans, and also the work that you are doing on this regard. And let's open the stage for questions. And so first question, I have a question. May I forward it now?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. I mean, Professor, and I see that you have done a lot of modeling work around the sea currents and the tracking the paths and of these nurdles and all these oil spills. What are the once you do this work? What are the remedial actions that you can take to prevent or to contain these things happening?
First, stop as I said, a lot of these happens human error. We can't do anything about it, right? All what we can actually do is, first of all, it's not what I can do, people to behave properly and be professional. But when an event happens, with the modeling and forecasting, we basically target. So we can actually direct people where the oil, let's say it was oil, would actually end up. So they can actually put preventive methods. There are other things that they can put. Let's put dispersants and oil booms, etc., to stop the oil coming aboard, and also to manage. But in many cases, there's nothing we can do, unfortunately. You know.
But anyway,
for example, you know, the shipping companies have realized, you know, there are lots, because what happens is that when you load a ship, a container which has nurdles is the lightest, so they try to put it on the top of the ship, on above and high up on the ship. If it's on a storm, they're the first ones to fall over the ocean. So this is a worldwide problem. So 1 month after this event, the shipping companies announced that they will now be putting nurdles inside the cargo, so they don't actually fall off. So those, we respond to events after it happens, unfortunately.
Yeah, in a way that at least you know where it ends up, then they can have some preventive measures at the end. Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
In the absence of, but I have another question. We'll take. I mean, the
Don't be shy.
yes. The one I explained you right at the beginning about iron ore transporting large ships capsizing in turbulent waters due to liquefaction. Can you comment on this as well, please, Professor?
Actually, I must say this is the first time I actually heard of an iron ore ship sinking, but I can only guess. So, you know, iron ore, as you know, is basically what do you call it? Earth, right? So when you have, you know, let's say sand or mud, some combination, it's soil. So if the soil gets wet, and you have the liquefaction means that it doesn't actually behave like a soil. Liquefaction means that when it's wet, it will act like a very high density fluid. So when the ship is moving, you would actually have these two forces which are acting together. And if you have resonance, you basically have a system that the ship will become unstable. That is my guess.
Yeah, as I understood, that was the cause because at the TML, the transportable moisture limits were above the standards, and that has caused the liquefaction of these solids, and which has, I mean, what happened was that the lower layers of iron ore had more moisture, and it all transported over the time, and then it became liquefied, and the whole mass acted as a fluid, and it changed the center of gravity, and then that tilted the ship and sank, and it has happened 2 or 3 incidents like that.
Yeah. So this was maybe 10 years ago. I was approached by the salt company. From Dampier and Australia, they're shipping salt mainly to the Northern Hemisphere because a lot of that salt is for Canada and the US to put during winter onto roads. I didn't realize that the temperatures of the hull affects the salt. So they were trying to find ways that they can navigate to avoid high temperatures of salt. So that, high ocean temperatures, so that the salt, when it gets to the destination, would be in the correct form and not changed its form. Anyway, that was an interesting question that was posed to me. No more. Well, we use the main ocean model that we use is called ocean modeling system, but we use many different models because we need to simulate the atmosphere. So for the atmosphere, we call the weather research model, WRF. Then we run for the ocean. Then we run a wave model, wind wave model 3. And then we run a separate model, particle tracking. So it's not one model, it's basically a whole modeling system that is coupled together. And to running these models, the most important thing is to having a high resolution bathymetry. All of these, as I showed you in the Mauritius, they were able to provide us with very high resolution bathymetry. The Mauritius, we could do a good model. Unfortunately, I'm still waiting for data from Sri Lanka for high resolution bathymetry. That's how things go.
Any questions written on the chat?
I answered one question which was on the
Okay, then it looks like no more questions. Please don't be shy. If you have any questions, please put forward. There's another one.
Okay, there's one. What is the environmental impact to Sri Lanka? New damages? Absolutely zero, nothing. It basically, in fact, it was on the edge of our, It was very small, 1 kilometer long oil spill, and the oil within 1 or 2 days actually evaporates. That's the biggest loss. So there was zero environmental impact to Sri Lanka. However, there were costs associated with monitoring that. So I think Sri Lanka may be looking at to claim some of those expenses, but I'm not 100% sure. The next one, do you suggest set up a high performance? Well, that's what we're doing. That's what we actually just got money from the Australian aid. So we're going to set up a high performance computing facility. So we are going to, we're going to develop the forecast system in at UWA. We will transfer it to NARA, and NARA will actually be running that in the system. So that provide that capability. So we're working with NARA, we're working with Navy, we're working with MIPA, the Meteorology Department. So all of the relevant government agencies are our stakeholders. We're not only actually doing the forecast, we're actually, as I said, it's no point using having a forecast system if we don't know that people are using it. Do you get, yes, definitely. Interestingly, we actually get the feedback when the forecast is not there. Let's say our website is broken, or we don't actually, for some reason, doesn't it? That's when we know people are using it, because they call us and said, where's our forecast? Yes, we do. I mean, like Western Australia, we give forecasts to the rock lobster fishermen. When the currents may be too strong, they can pull out their lobster pots. We're now also, as part of a different project, we're developing these forecasts for the aquaculture industry to identify locations which are more suited for aquaculture in Sri Lanka, and then also have forecasts for that. Well, we haven't actually got the forecast as yet. Remember, I told you that a lot of these things happen when many events has to happen before somebody or people will think. So I think it's about 10 or 15 years ago, there were 32 fishermen went out fishing from, I think, Mataro or Mirissa, never came back. So then people were saying, we need to have a forecast system. It took 10 years. It took me 10 years to convince people. We had many meetings, we had many things. Nobody said, oh yeah, we should have that. So we wrote reports, we wrote conference reports, and then we actually come back and said, no, we don't. So now Express Pearl has actually tipped the thing that we will have a forecast. So if you're interested, with the dialogue, we're going to develop part of this through the Fisheries Department, through Meteorology Department. Dialogue has got a system which is called Sayuru. That's a boy's name, Sayuru, right? If you do Dialogue Sayuru, that's a very nice YouTube video which basically tells how we will contribute this to the fishermen. They sign up for SMS and they will actually get the weather forecast. We will also broadcast this into the different fishing boat harbors. So they would also have, the idea is to have a sort of a system where we might have like a traffic light system for around Sri Lanka. Red means don't go out to sea, green, you're okay, etc. We do have a different forecast system that I did about 15 years ago, which has been still going. This provides fishermen with what we call potential fishing zone forecast. So the tuna fishermen can go and target particular areas of the ocean where the conditions are optimum for aggregation of tuna. Now NARA issues that every Monday for the last 16 years. If for some reason they don't do it, fishermen ring up and say, where's the forecast? That is the good feedback that we have, demanding where's the forecast.
Yeah. Okay, Professor, then it looks like there are no more questions. And I take this opportunity to thank Professor Charita Pattaj for his very interesting presentation. And it has been immensely helpful for us to understand what is happening in ocean sector as something new for some of us. And I hope that many who joined today will be in touch with you to get feedbacks and also to join hands with you to do more work in this sector. And also, we have seen how you are helping Sri Lankan fishermen to save their lives, number one, and also continue their livelihood. And it's a great impact. And we have to, as Sri Lankans living overseas, I take this opportunity to thank you for your great work helping Sri Lankans over there. And finally, and it's a great pleasure to listen to you on this presentation. And I hope that there has been a lot of impact on our thinking and also how we understand what is happening in the ocean sector. And thank you very much, Professor Charita Pattaj, again. And so we are looking forward to see you again in our future webinars in times to come. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you for listening.
Thank you all. Okay.